Hey guys, Jody Blackwelder here with Outdoor Crusade. And today I have the author of a new book called Gun Curious. Now, his first name's David. I will butcher his last name. He's tried to go over it with me when we started this podcast, and I'm not even going to try because I can't even say Smith right. So, David, will you please introduce yourself and pronounce your last name?
Certainly. I'm happy to be here to start, but my name is David Yamane, and I'm a professor of sociology at Wake Forest University.
Well, I appreciate you coming on with us today, David. Now, you know, me and David, we know each other outside of work, and he actually doesn't live too far from me. Now, when he told me that he wrote this book, Gun Curious, I personally thought, I grew up pretty much with gun brand stickers on my bottle when I was a kid, so I didn't think there would be much out of this book that I would personally take away or something new that I would learn. But David blessed me with a copy, and I went through it. And David, I have to say that even I think this book is good for anyone for different reasons. Like for me, someone who's a gun owner, you really, through your book, taught me how to engage in a conversation with someone in a way that will be less argumentative and maybe at the end of the day change the way that their perception of firearms is. So my question to you, was that your goal in writing the book to start with, or how did you come about wanting to write this book in general?
Yeah, well, I started with the idea that I would just write another academic book for other people who are sociologists in my field. And then along the way, I realized that maybe I had a bigger story to tell and a bigger audience to try to reach. And so I really pivoted maybe 5, 6 years ago to try to write a book that would be of interest to, I think three main groups of people. The first of all, gun skeptics. Secondly, people who are what I would call gun curious. They're not either, bought into gun control or gun rights. They're just curious or interested in guns. They may or may not be gun owners yet. And then the third audience would be people who are currently gun owners. And, I think that one of the reasons I thought that I might be able to reach all three of these groups is because I myself have been a member of all three of those groups. For 42 years of my life, I wasn't really skeptical of guns. I just didn't really know them. They weren't part of my life. And then for a short period, I was gun curious. I was kind of interested, but I wasn't yet a gun owner. And then for the last 12 years of my life, I've been a gun owner and, spending a lot of time within gun culture trying to figure it out. So I do hope that I can talk to all three of those groups. And those are really the three audiences I hope will get something out of the book.
I agree that you know those audiences would definitely benefit from reading it. Again, I'm just was taken back far as how well you articulate the arguments and describe. It's kind of, I told you whenever after I read it that it's kind of like being behind the steering wheel and you're turning left to the right. You don't really like get into the argumentative state that a lot of this time or a lot of times these conversations go into. So now you told me that you was like 40, 42, somewhere in there when you first got a gun. What made you say, okay, I'm going to make this step?
Yeah. Well, certainly I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area of California, which, was pretty gunless. And then I got into sociology and I got into higher education, which tends to be very liberal and also very gunless. And that just sort of followed me through my life. And it wasn't until I got to North Carolina in 2005 and then, several years into living here that guns really kind of came onto my radar. And, curiously, one of the first ways that guns really came onto my radar was by accidentally watching the TV show Top Shot, which I just devoured and I loved, and it really opened me up to this world of firearms that I didn't even know existed. Different types of firearms, what people could do with firearms, amazing feats of marksmanship, and then I started noticing that people I played tennis with had firearms. My real estate agent carried a gun. My girlfriend at the time, was in the Coast Guard. She carried a gun, and so just the reality of guns here in North Carolina really dawned on me, and I felt like I was the only person who didn't have a gun. So Sandy helped set me up with Jimmy Staley, who's a state trooper here in North Carolina, graduate of Davie High School with my wife Sandy, and he took me out to his farm here in Davie, showed me how to hold a gun and pull the trigger, and I really thought I was going to be kind of frightened by the experience or just come away with it saying, okay, now I know what that's like. But I had a good time. And, that was really the moment when I decided, hey, I want to explore this gun thing more.
So after, I mean, you're going from, you know, no experience, like not really being a part of your culture, to where you're at now. So what was you most surprised about in the gun culture in general?
Yeah, I think that probably, the subtitle of the book is A Liberal Professor's Surprising Journey Inside America's Gun Culture. And, the first surprise is that I become a gun owner at all and spend 12 years trying to figure it out. But then, as I journeyed, inside gun culture, there really are a lot of stereotypes about gun owners. I know you joke a lot about, being a redneck from Davie County. And that's really what a lot of people who are outside of gun culture really think, that we're talking about sort of straight, white, politically and religiously conservative men from the rural South. That's who gun owners are, right? Duck Dynasty, those
Right.
characters
Yes.
represent gun ownership for a lot of people. And, you know, even going into gun ownership, right? One of the reasons why it became to seem normal for me for the start was, again, one of my best friends. I play tennis with the guy. He works in tech, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I have two pistols in my basement." And another guy's like, "Oh yeah, I have two shotguns I inherited from my grandfather." And my real estate agent, of course, I carry a gun when I'm showing houses. And I'm like, "Whoa, it's really like just that idea that gun ownership is very normal and that normal people use guns." That's the biggest surprise of all of them, really, for me. And that you wouldn't really know that if you only consume information about guns and gun owners and gun culture from the media, or really from other sociologists who study guns. They really only focus on the negative aspects of it.
So um with you being in your environment at Wake Forest, do you ever, or how do you go to the defense of gun ownership in general? Like, I know that I would imagine, I don't know, I would imagine that you have some interesting conversations with some of your circle at Wake Forest.
Well,
So,
so yeah, the I talk about the three audiences I imagined for the book, but my if I could reach a single audience, I would really love to reach the gun skeptics, because really the book, more than anything, tries to explain, why do guns make sense to people who own guns, right? Why does concealed carry make sense to people who carry concealed? Why does owning an AR-15 make sense? What does good gun training look like? Also, how do we think about, risk and the positives of gun ownership, and also the downside risks of gun ownership? So these are all the things that I really want to convey to people who really don't understand guns. And again, that was me 42 years of my life. If you would have asked me, I wouldn't have necessarily spewed hate against guns or gun owners, but I really just would have no idea, like, why does someone need to carry a gun to get a gallon of milk at the grocery store? And so when people address me about my work who have skepticism about guns, I really do try to take on this attitude that whatever reservations they have or whatever questions they have are really authentic questions, right? That they're not trying to get me, even if I feel like they're trying to get me, I try not to answer them like they're trying to get me. And it's not always easy, but, I do try to take that approach when people ask me these questions about guns. In terms of, really a lot of my colleagues, we just sort of leave each other alone. We, have
Right.
a bit of a laissez-faire attitude where I do my work, you do your work. But I do sometimes wonder, I'm on Twitter a lot. I'm engaging with other people who study guns and who work in the space, like gun violence prevention advocates. And, when they do something good, I try to give them positive feedback. If someone else publishes a book, I say congratulations. And I do sometimes feel like I'm being kind of shadow banned in real life because I'm getting a lot of affirmation from people about the book, but they tend not to be other scholars or other people I know from my professional work. They're not falling over themselves to congratulate me on the publication of my book.
So how hard was it to actually get this book published in the realm of things, as far as, let's compare. You're an author already, you've published other books, so give us a comparison of how this played out for this book.
Yeah. Well, once I decided to say I'm not going to write an academic book, I'm going to write a book that, your average person on the street might read. That kind of put me into a different type of publishing than I've done before. But I had to get an agent who, you can't directly sell a book to publishers. You have to have an agent. So I found agent in New York City, one of the best, leading agents in his field, who works for one of the biggest literary agencies in New York City. And he shopped the book proposal around to 33 different publishers, all of whom said no. And so, it was only by, really a stroke of luck that someone from McFarland Publishers, which is here in Jefferson, North Carolina, got in touch with me because she graduated from Wake Forest and her kids went to Wake Forest and she saw me on LinkedIn. So she, invited me to talk to her about McFarland publishing the book. But, I was really at the point where my agent said, there's nothing more I can do to help you. And I was thinking, well, I guess I just have to self-publish the book. So the book was very close to, not being published by a traditional publisher at all. And I believe, some of them would say no just because they say no to most projects, but there was some real anti-gun bias among the editors at these New York City publishing houses, um, you know, some of which really came out, in the process. And so that was something I wasn't really expecting because, again, I'm a liberal myself. So, when I thought, hey, I'm a liberal, you guys are liberal, like I'm trying to explain guns to you from our perspective, and for to have that many people say no, it definitely hurt.
So this is, well, I'm trying to think how to phrase this question, but in the political realm, both sides know that to get people to the ballot box, it's not like a pat. They pat them on the back, say, "Wow, I would really like for you to come vote." They have to make them mad, and they
Mm-hmm.
have to make them feel like that. If they don't, get to the box and the world's ending and life changes forever. So with that type of constant political bipolar or polarism of the subject, how much do you think that plays into what the average person, both liberal and conservative, believes about guns and the place of guns in society?
Yeah, I think, we definitely live in a very polarized time, and guns are definitely a kind of wedge issue that drives people apart. But I also, and this may be my naive liberal optimism, but I also believe that there are a lot of people who, want to understand better and want to get along better, right? So there are certain, people who are kind of the base of, Democrat and Republican, who are never going to listen to each other and never going to change their minds about guns. But I also think there's, a lot of people in the middle who, are not 100%, committed. They're not 100% 2A. They're not 100% gun control. And that they really, if they could understand better the complexity of guns in society, and this is one of the things I really try to get at throughout the whole book, is that guns are really very paradoxical in society. They're generally, used by good people for good purposes, and they're occasionally used by bad people for bad purposes. And both of those things exist at the same time, but we really want things to be one or the other. So, I feel like I am swimming against the tide a little bit, but
Right.
I'm hopeful that if the book can get out there, if people, will read and open their mind and, be curious, that's another aspect of the gun curious in the title, is if you're curious about guns, that I try to offer a calm and nuanced perspective on guns and gun owners and gun culture.
Right. So, my father, he was a barber for years, had a shop right below uh, Wake Forest University, and that area is more of a liberal area, especially compared to Davie County. And I worked there for 20 years, and I noticed just in conversation with customers that when gun violence went up, say when the economy got bad and people lost jobs, there was layoff, you always have violence, robberies, that kind of thing go up. And they would come in knowing that I was a gun owner and ask me a million questions just because now they feel threatened of their property, their, safety. And I feel like now that, especially in the environment we're in, that there's a lot of conversation that's happening in more liberal areas and cities, how to protect yourself and family. And I
Yeah.
definitely see like your book has something that if there is a single mom who or a family that hasn't grew up around guns would be a book they could set down, knock out in a week or two, and really have an understanding of the place of a firearm, in a person's life and the good that it brings. So you also, let's see, gun gun culture blog, a YouTube channel. So tell me more about like if someone, they read your book or they hear this podcast and they just want to know more about you. I know that you told me before that you work on some other things that you published to. Are you still doing that or?
Yeah, I when I first got going on in this area, I didn't really know anybody or anything about it. So I started a blog back in 2012, and I've been consistently blogging there over the last 12 years. It's called Gun Culture 2.0. So if you just Google Gun Culture 2.0, you should be able to find my blog. I don't post to it as much as I used to because honestly, blog readership has really fallen off in the past several years, but I still am present there. When I saw my blog readership falling off, I actually started a YouTube channel that's called Light Over Heat, which kind of gets at
Okay.
this, idea of trying to, not just yell at people, but try to, bring some education and enlightenment to the issue. I try to put a video out there every week, so I'm not, flooding the field with things. But if you go to lightoverheat.com, you can find my YouTube channel, and then I am, on all the other social medias of Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. So I try to engage with people as much as possible because that's one of the ways I really learn about things, that I figure out what people are thinking through their responses to me. I see what other people are talking about, and there's really so much going on. I talk about America's gun culture in the subtitle of the book, but as you know, there really are many different subcultures, right? And
Right.
for example, I don't talk at all really about precision rifle shooting or hunting, or collecting, which are all also really important subcultures within gun culture. I really focus on defensive gun culture a lot because that was my entry really into the field. So I learn a lot from people who are doing other things with guns other than defending themselves.
So with you now kind of entering this realm, is it going to be something that you think in the future you'll have more projects on? Do you see yourself as kind of being a voice for firearm ownership now? I mean, so what do you have in your mind? Where do you see yourself in the next year or so on in any kind of projects you may be working on?
Yeah. That's a great question. As you know, I've been 12 years to get this book out, it's been a lot of struggle, a lot of expense in terms of time and money, and being away from family and other sacrifices like that. So I'm really gonna spend the rest of 2024 seeing whether this book makes any difference. And I think if the book does seem to make a difference, I'll continue to work in the area of guns, possibly picking up some of those things that I haven't really studied as much, like hunting, precision shooting, things like that, collecting. And if the book is a dud, if I did made my best effort to try to make our conversations about guns better, and people don't want to hear it, then I'll just move on with my life. I'm 56 years old now. I probably have a lot more life behind me than ahead of me. So I don't want to continue to ram my head against a wall if people don't find what I'm doing useful.
So what gauges are you going to be looking at as far as where you where you come up with, okay, this worked, or this didn't work? What is it that you get on the computer and you're looking, you say, wow, this is awesome? Because the reason I ask is I've been following you on Facebook, and it seems like you have been invited and wrote about. I mean, they pretty much just adopted you into the Second Amendment uh, culture here. So already I feel like you have made inroads that most haven't. So, like, what else would you judge us by?
Yeah, well, I have to get the other side bought in. I definitely, oddly, as a liberal, sort of am more welcome in gun culture than I am as a gun owner being welcomed into some of these liberal circles. And, so for every Cam Edwards or Amanda Suffolcool or, Jody Blackwelder who invites me to talk to them about my work, I want to see the other side. I want to see, Morning Joe and Terry Gross on NPR, and people like that wanting to hear what I have to say. I think that, and there's a sense in which I think gun owners speak pretty well for themselves, and maybe I add a different kind of way of doing that and trying to speak to the gun curious and the gun skeptics. But if people who are on the gun skeptical side don't want to hear what I have to say, don't take my work seriously, then that I think I won't have achieved my goal.
Well, so I'm just going to share this with you, and this is just coming from the heart. So for 15 years, I have been in the outdoor media and industry. So what you're going against is actually, especially like some of the ones that you mentioned there, is they would probably love to have you on their show. But anytime it comes to a firearm and it's some corporate, um, something huge, something bigger than that, is relying on advertising or relying on donations, like NPR, that type thing, they tread so lightly on anything with the firearm. They will not rock. It's like gatekeepers, protecting kind of their bottom line. So just know that if you don't get invited to those, it probably has nothing to do with the host, the show. It is probably top tier. The reason why, because I know when I was working with projects I worked on in the past, I mean, you would wake up and YouTube would delete your whole channel because you mentioned something about an AR or an accessory to an AR. So you could have dedicated time to buying equipment, video equipment, done everything right. That one video would get you 3 flags, channels gone. They won't even answer you in emails. All the added income gone. I mean, and Facebook too. So I think that you're probably seeing some of the stuff that we've had to learn to work around over especially the last 10 years or 8 years or so. So just keep that in mind as
Yeah.
you're kind of navigating that.
Yeah. And,
But
I've had, some success in reaching out, and, I just think it's really, a matter of interest, that there's a sense in which, and I said the other night at my book launch that you were at, that, you know, airplane crashes, that's newsworthy. Airplane lands safely, that's not newsworthy. And if a lot
right,
of my idea about guns is, gun owners are landing the plane safely millions of times every day. So, what is that, how is that gonna make the news? But as people reflect more on the big picture, like what is the place of guns in American society? We hear that question raised all the time in the mainstream media, and I'd love to, be the person that they call for a different perspective, as opposed to kind of having all the usual suspects, who are going to talk about all of the terrible reasons why guns are a reality in American society.
Right. I remember during your book launch, you said that if you would have named your book "How Guns Destroy Democracy" or "How Guns Save Democracy," you would be invited everywhere. Publishers would have it'd been a total different take, because that's just how, I guess, the polarized the argument is right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's definitely the case. And I've seen both of those books have been written and published recently, and so that's not my disposition. And I definitely, again, trying to think of moving beyond, the cheering and the booing that, people naturally fall to. And I get it. I understand, why people do that. And, maybe the work I do may always be a smaller niche, but as long as I feel like it's, getting people to think and making some kind of contribution, I'm happy. I'm very, when I sit and look at the book, which I've been doing a lot lately as I've been, preparing for podcasts and other things, I really look at it and I think this really, if nothing else, this truly represents my experience and what I think is the reality of American gun culture. And I guess at the end of the day, I'm pretty happy about that.
So you mentioned that you haven't got into the other subcategories like hunting, target shooting, that kind of stuff. So if you was to have an invite from someone who lives in Davie County to come and, deer hunting, you would go do that?
Man, I've had a ton of invitations from people to go hunting with them. And as you know, I start the book by telling this story about being a little kid growing up and shooting a BB gun and shooting a bird and killing it. And I just felt sick in that moment. And so there's a huge part of me that wants to hunt, because I feel as a meat eater, I'm pretty hypocritical not to, have my hands a little bit closer to where my food comes from. But there's also a big part of me that is just thinks that I will literally be physically sick doing that. So how do I overcome that?
Well, so I personally have an asset that could help walk you through that, and that is my wife, Lisa, because she's also from California, Sacramento.
Oh,
She
nice.
was a vegetarian for years, and over time, just started worrying about where her food came from, being healthier and that type thing. So she actually just killed her first deer 2 years ago,
Hmm.
and now she went from not having a firearm really of her own, never shooting a bow, to taking a deer with a bow. And last year she was skinning. I would honestly go to work, come home, and there would be a deer cut up in the refrigerator. Now
Wow.
that's when I knew that I married the right person. So, but yeah, I think y'all two would have a interesting, because y'all have so much in common, far
Yeah.
as So if you decide that you want to, take that leap, I think I live about 10 minutes from you. So, and we got plenty of does and that kind of thing that you could definitely maybe bring some meat home. So
Yeah, man.
the
Well,
invitation is open.
I appreciate it. And I don't want to turn your podcast around on you, but so I've talked to a lot of people about hunting, and some people say, if you have some reservations, like I don't have any moral reservations about hunting. I mean, I eat meat constantly, so that is not an issue. And if anything, I feel like a hypocrite. But if I have sort of reservations about how I will feel emotionally and physically hunting,
Yeah.
some people say, you have to start with birds, and because they seem somehow less human. And then other people are like, no, you should not start with birds, you really should start with deer, because that is you confronting the reality of taking animal life much more
Right.
directly. What's your take on that?
Well, I'll tell you, I haven't shared this publicly. I haven't really talked about it even in the barbershop. But about 4 years ago, I shot a deer, made a bad shot on it, my fault, and it hit the ground. It jumped up. I tracked it, and it got into a thicket, and I lost it. And that bothered me. I didn't hunt from that. It was muzzleloader season, and I keep doing this thing to where I want to hunt with everything that my grandpa hunted with. Like I just love vintage hunting gear, and I don't know why I'm just so outdated in my mind. Well, I was hunting with an old iron sight muzzleloader. I'm 40 some years old now, and I thought I had it where it should be, but I didn't, obviously. So from the first week of muzzleloader season to the end of the season, I didn't go back hunting. I felt so bad
Mm.
I mean, so even me who's taken a lot of different game, it's an emotional ride. And whenever you're putting in effort of, like figuring out where the deer move, and you spend time in the woods, you really get connected. And you also, for me, it's being connected to the environment around me. And whenever you actually accomplish that, it's like a finishing a project that you just feel accomplished on the inside. There's not a joy in actually taking life. There's a joy in providing food for the experience I went through and that type of thing. But when it goes wrong, it feels awful.
Mm.
I mean, so even for me, I have those feelings. But if you actually put yourself forward and try it, I mean, you're not going to know how it feels. I've took people hunting before, especially from Winston, who were in the city, brought them out here, and they shot something. They had a whole range of emotions, and some of them like, I'll never do this again. Even well, I ain't gonna call out somebody, but I had a very good friend who hunted for years, and then one day he just said, he said, it brings me more emotional grief than it does, pleasure to go do this. And he just chose not to hunt anymore. And I was really surprised because we hunted a lot together.
Mm-hmm.
But so there's definitely a lot of feelings involved in it. So,
So tell me this, so you grew up hunting, and many
right.
people grow up, they learn to hunt in their families when they're kids. When you first are introduced to hunting, do you go out and actually shoot, or do you sort of go out like with your dad and watch what he does and figure out how it works, and then at some later point you're introduced to actual
Well,
shooting part?
so when I grew up, deer season was short. It wasn't a long deer season. And even when I was like a really young kid, most people just small game hunted. Then a few was getting into deer hunting. And here in Davie County, so they started populating North Carolina, like reintroducing deer. And deer here in Davie County, if you seen one, it was like, oh wow, look, I mean, it was like you stopped in the middle of the road, So
Mm-hmm.
especially if it had, a decent rack, rack on it, antlers. So for me and my generation, we were introduced more through small game hunting, and then with go deer hunting. Small game hunting, they would take you as a kid with them squirrel hunting or rabbit hunting with dogs. I remember, they would tell my dad, he gave me a stick. He said, here, in case the rabbit comes by. I was like 6 years old. That's all I needed was a stick. But man, I thought, man, I was going to kill something with that stick. I was pretty confident I could accomplish this mission. But, then as I got age appropriate, they introduced, firearms. And I was around 13 or 14 when I started actually hunting on my own. And that was mainly squirrel hunting and some rabbit hunting. We had hunting dogs. And then deer hunting, I was around 14, something like that, when I got my first bow. And I was black powder hunting with an old Thompson Center. Uh, it looked very primitive. It's a very primitive gun, that one was. And so that was how it was for me and pretty much most of the friends that I had through school.
Mm-hmm.
So it was never, hey, I'm going to take this 6-year-old out. Now there's people do it. I ain't saying anything wrong with it, but the generation that raised me, they wouldn't let you be around a firearm until you was a very mature, responsible. You had to show that you was safe. And it wasn't, here, let me hold the gun for you. When you pull the trigger, now you done it. It was, you had to earn it. So
Right. Yeah.
that was just the generation I was raised by. So
Yeah. Well, I know that hunting is some interest has fallen off. It's a lot harder to hunt as the landscape of homes and open space changes. But I still know it's a big part of the reality of America and also a big part of the reality of guns. So
well,
I'm interested, and I'm going to put that invitation in my calendar, and we'll figure out some way
all
to
right.
do it. Whether I actually use a bow or shoot a gun the first time, maybe I'll go out and just
Well,
watch.
so
I definitely am an observer.
all right. Well, you just tag along with us. So that could be actually a good experience for you, just to, especially with your degrees and what you do for a living. Just the experience of hanging out with some country folk, killing some deer. That would probably be good for you.
Hey, one of the first things I ever did when I got into guns is Sandy and I got some over under shotguns and we started shooting sporting clays out in Harmony. And so we would go out there and the guys they'd take us out on their golf cart or their gator just to kind of show us the property. And those guys were so much more in tune with every aspect of the environment than I was, being someone raised kind of in the suburbs and living in the city, just noticing wind patterns, sky patterns, things, wildlife. Like this one guy's like, look at that frog. I'm like, what frog? Like I couldn't even see it. So, I think that people who live close to the land, really are environmentalists in ways that people like me who I take my recycling bin out to the curb every 2 weeks, just aren't really.
Right. I know when Lisa she expressed interest in doing all this stuff, I started taking her out. There's like so much stuff being in the woods and doing this type thing that is just like commonplace, but it wasn't commonplace for her because
Mm-hmm.
she hadn't experienced it. And I would catch myself saying, really? I mean, why would you? Then, a couple of times of her giving me the look and saying, hey, I don't know. I learned to shut up and say, hey, actually, this is how,
Right. Right.
yeah. But it was, being with her has really taught me like the disconnect, someone who has been raised in the outdoors compared to someone who is just now getting in the outdoors. And it's taught me a lot of patience
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of understanding of explaining simple things to me, which are not simple, to them. So, like, or, that type thing. So it really educated me in that.
Yeah.
Now, if someone wants to buy your book today, um, what options do they have as far as finding your book?
Yeah, so today is Wednesday, June 5th, and ordinarily I'd say that you could get it on Amazon. Amazon actually sold out of their inventory of my book before June 1st when the book actually was published based on pre-orders. So my publisher is working on getting Amazon restocked. But if you go to guncurious.com, that's my homepage for the book. It gives all sorts of purchase options, including Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books a Million, bookshop.org, or you can go to your local bookstore. Or if you don't want to actually buy the book or you can't afford to buy the book, you can also ask your local library to order a copy of the book for their own inventory. And a lot of local libraries take their sort of patrons' suggestions really serious in that. So, I hopefully that anybody who wants to get the book, has the ability to do that. But guncurious.com really is the bottom line. Go there and you can find a lot of options.
Okay, we'll also include that link with this episode and on our social media. And so you can find David's book, Gun Curious, at his website, also at our website at Outdoor Crusade. We'll have some links to it with this podcast. And David, I really appreciate you taking the time and talking with us. And I enjoyed it as always. And hopefully we can spend some time together in the fall and maybe get you in some camouflage clothing. But I appreciate you being on the show today.
Yeah, I appreciate the invitation. I appreciate the conversation. I really enjoyed it, and I definitely hope to see you either in the barbershop or in the field.
All right. Well, thank you, David. And thank y'all for tuning in. And we'll be back next week with another podcast here at Outdoor Crusade. Make sure you like and follow. And you can find us on all of your podcast platforms. Again, thank y'all for listening. Thank you, David. Have a great day.